Starting this bulletin with some breaking news. Russia's defense ministry today said that some forces deployed near Ukraine have begun returning to their bases after having completed their tasks. These units belong to southern and western military districts, according to reports carried by Russian news agencies. These developments come after Russia seemingly opened a door on Monday to a diplomatic resolution to the Ukraine standoff. The change in tone was displayed in a carefully choreographed meeting between President Putin and his foreign minister Sergei Lavrov. This was their televised address.
Безопасностью в Европе и ответа на наши озабоченности, связанные с движением по поводу реакции на полученные ответы.
Привлекая их внимание к тому, что обязательства по недельности безопасности гораздо также содержатся конкретные предложения по целому ряду мер снижения военных.
Putin asks Lavrov if there was a chance of reaching an agreement with the West. Lavrov suggested continuing with dialogue. Putin says fine, giving his assent from the other end of an extremely long table. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has said that Putin was willing to hold talks on security guarantees and also willing to negotiate. As speculation mounts, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz is due in Moscow today for talks with Putin. This is the latest such visit by European leaders aimed at avoiding a fully blown conflict. Ahead of his trip to Moscow, Scholz visited Kyiv on Monday and vowed that Berlin and its Western allies would maintain support for Ukraine's security and independence, urging Russia to take up offers of dialogue. But Berlin's close business relations with Moscow and heavy reliance on Russian natural gas imports have been a source of lingering concern. Let's talk more about that. WION correspondent Trent Murray is joining us live from Berlin. Thank you for your time and welcome to this broadcast. Trent, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is headed to Russia from Kyiv. Does his diplomacy effort look promising?
Well, that is certainly the ambition of the German Chancellor and the German government. In their words, they are trying to avert a war in Europe. And so that is why we are seeing this whistle-stop tour of diplomacy led by Chancellor Scholz, as you mentioned, spending much of the day yesterday in Kiev. In many ways, though, today is probably the main event as he goes to Moscow to try and pull President Putin back from the brink of any possible conflict. We, of course, know that Germany, as part of NATO, has been working incredibly hard to try and prevent any sort of conflict erupting, but also trying to make it clear that if there is an incursion of the Ukrainian border, that there will be a strong and very tough response on the Kremlin. Now, we understand that today, as part of those meetings with President Putin, Chancellor Scholz will be coming with some numbers, if you will, wanting to make it very clear what the economic cost will be, spelling it out quite plainly. Also, some discussions over that controversial Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which will pump gas directly from Russia into Germany, a very lucrative project for the coffers of the Kremlin. But Berlin has been under a lot of pressure to make it clear to Vladimir Putin that if an attack takes place, that pipeline will not open. Whether Olaf Scholz gives that message or not, we have to wait and see, but it will be a very high-stakes summit between the two leaders.
Trent, India is the latest country to join more than a dozen other countries, including Germany, to ask their citizens to leave Ukraine. What prompted Germany to take such an action, and yet its leader travelled to Ukraine?
Yeah, it is an alarming development, isn't it? More and more countries lining up to tell their citizens that if they're in Ukraine, it's time to get out. Of course, Germany joining the UK, the US, Israel, Australia, the list is getting very, very longer. I think much of this is being driven by intelligence, both out of the Pentagon in the US and also out of London, signalling that an attack could take place at any moment. I mean, the language we are hearing from Washington and London, and especially in all of this, is just extraordinary, saying things like an attack could be imminent. Of course, the US embassy also essentially closing up shop shop in Kiev and moving to the west of the country. I think it's against that backdrop, though, that Olaf Scholz and other European representatives will continue to go to the region to try and defuse these tensions. But it does come as other warnings start to emerge across Europe. The latest is a suggestion that there could be some cyber attacks possibly on the way, a wave of cyber attacks on NATO countries. Again, that suggestion coming out of both US and British intelligence. So this has got many, many European capitals quite nervous, which is why I think this meeting today between Olaf Scholz and President Putin will be watched by many, many people to see if we can try and find a way to just bring the temperature down in all of this.
Finally, Trent, several countries have threatened sanctions if Russia invades Ukraine. What impact would sanctions on Russia pose on the economy of countries in the European bloc?
Yeah, well, that is, it's a good question, because much of the discussion has been centred around the type of economic damage it could do to Russia. But of course, Russia, in reverse, does do a lot of business with European countries, including right here in Germany. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, has said that the EU values its relationship with Russia, its trading relationship, but Russia values it and needs it more. In other words, yes, Europe would have to take a bit of an economic hit in all of this as well, but it would impact Russia a lot more. One area of particular noteworthiness is energy, gas. Europe relies a lot on Russian gas essentially to keep the lights on, especially over winter. About 40% of its gas needs come from Russia. We understand the European Union has been stepping up conversations with countries like Qatar and Norway to try and see if they will be available to help provide additional supplies to help fill that gap if there is some sort of disruption from Russia.
Live from Berlin, Germany, Trent Murray, thank you very much for your insights and for talking to us today. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.